I never should have touched that photograph. The moment my gloved fingers made contact with its surface, a chill radiated up my arm, a sensation I initially attributed to the damp cold of the Ravenscroft Manor archives. Now 3 weeks later, as I sit in my London flat listening to the strange scratching sounds coming from inside my walls, I know better. My name is Dr. Rebecca Collins, historian specializing in Victorian psychiatric practices. When the current Lord Blackwood granted me unprecedented access to his family's private records for my research on 19th century treatment of female hysteria, I thought it was the opportunity of a lifetime. I never imagined it would become my nightmare. You won't believe what happened next. Watch until the end. The photograph was unremarkable at first glance, a sepia-toned image dated June 17th, 1903, showing a stern-faced young gentleman in an impeccable three-piece suit, standing beside a visibly pregnant maid. I found it tucked between the pages of an unmarked leather-bound journal, its edges yellowed with age. "Interesting find?" asked Jonathan Blackwood, the current lord of the manor, his voice startling me. I hadn't heard him enter the archives. "Just a family photograph," I replied, holding it up. "One of your ancestors with a household servant, it seems." Lord Blackwood took the photograph, his expression changing subtly as he examined it. "Thomas Blackwood," he said finally, "my great-great-grandfather, and that must be Emma Wilson." "The maid?" I asked. "Not exactly." He hesitated, then added, "The family history regarding Emma is complicated. I'm surprised this photograph still exists. I thought my father had removed all traces of her from the archives." His words piqued my professional curiosity. Why would he do that? "Some family stories are best left buried, Dr. Collins." He handed the photograph back to me. "But as you're here to research psychiatric treatments of the era, perhaps Emma's story might interest you after all. She was a patient before she came to Ravenscroft." "A patient? You mean at an asylum?" My interest was fully engaged now. "Precisely. Holloway Sanatorium, if I recall correctly. My ancestor Thomas was on their board of governors. That's how they met." He glanced at his watch. "I have an engagement in London this evening. Feel free to continue your research, but please remember our agreement. Any findings must be approved by me before publication." After he left, I studied the photograph more carefully. The young woman's face was gaunt despite her protruding belly, her eyes haunted. There was something unsettling about her expression, a vacancy that suggested deep psychological distress. I turned to the journal where I'd found the photograph. The handwriting was elegant, but erratic. The entries dated from January to November 1903. The journal belonged to Thomas Blackwood himself, and from the first page, it was clear that this was no ordinary family record. January 15th, 1903. It has been exactly 1 year since Catherine left this world. The conventional methods have failed. After extensive consultation with Dr. Harding, I am convinced that more radical approaches are necessary. The spiritual essence remains. It merely requires a suitable vessel for return. January 30th, 1903. Visited Holloway today. Among the patients, one woman caught my attention. Her resemblance to Catherine is remarkable. The same delicate features, the same chestnut hair. Her name is Emma Wilson, committed by her family for unnatural melancholia following the death of her sister. The symmetry is almost poetic. Dr. Harding agrees she would be ideal. February 17th, 1903. Emma has been released into my care. The official story is that she will serve as a lady's maid, learning domestic skills as part of her rehabilitation. The staff have been instructed not to question her behavior, no matter how strange. The conditioning begins tonight. As I read on, a disturbing picture emerged. Thomas Blackwood, grief-stricken after his wife Catherine's death, had become obsessed with occult practices aimed at bringing her spirit back. Emma, with her uncanny resemblance to Catherine, had been selected as the vessel for this macabre experiment. The journal detailed Thomas's conditioning methods, a combination of hypnosis, isolation, and peculiar rituals involving mirrors and specific musical compositions, all designed to make Emma more receptive to Catherine's spirit. Most disturbing were his descriptions of Emma's gradual transformation. April 3rd, 1903. Progress is remarkable. Emma responded to Catherine's name today. When I called to her across the drawing room, she turned without hesitation, her eyes momentarily showing a spark of recognition I have not seen since Catherine's passing. Dr. Harding says this is merely the power of suggestion, but I know better. She's coming back to me. May 12th, 1903. Emma Chalk Catherine played the pianoforte today, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat, Catherine's favorite piece. Emma never learned to play. The evidence is becoming irrefutable. The vessel is accepting its new inhabitant. Have you ever experienced something similar? Let us know in the comments. I was so engrossed in the journal that I barely noticed the daylight fading. The archives, housed in the east wing of Ravenscroft Manor, were now bathed in shadows. I reached for the lamp on the desk, but as I did, a reflection in the window caught my eye. A woman standing behind me. I spun around, heart racing, but the room was empty. When I turned back to the window, the reflection was gone. My academic mind offered rational explanations, a trick of the light, fatigue from hours of reading, but a deeper instinct told me something else was happening. Gathering the journal and photograph, I decided to continue reading in my hotel room. As I packed these items into my bag, I noticed something odd about the photograph that I'd missed earlier. Emma's pregnant belly didn't look quite right. The proportions were slightly off, the fabric of her dress falling in unnatural ways. It almost looked like padding. Back in my hotel room, I examined the photograph with a magnifying glass. My suspicion was confirmed. Emma wasn't pregnant. The bulge was artificial, carefully constructed to give the appearance of pregnancy. But why? The answer came in the journal entries from late May 27, 1903. The physical vessel must be prepared. Dr. Harding has advised that Catherine's essence will be more likely to fully inhabit Emma if she believes she is carrying new life. The padding beneath her clothes serves two purposes. It reinforces this belief in her susceptible mind, and it provides a convenient explanation to the staff for her changing behavior. June 10th, 1903. Emma has begun speaking to the child, telling it stories of her life with me, Catherine's life. Her memories are becoming more detailed, more accurate. Last night, she recalled our honeymoon in Venice, describing the exact pattern of the tiles in our hotel room. Emma has never left England. The journal described how Thomas commissioned the photograph as documentation of his experiment's progress, planning a series of images to capture Emma's transformation into Catherine. As I read deeper into the night, the entries became increasingly disturbing. July 3rd, 1903, Emma tried to escape today, found her attempting to climb over the garden wall. When restrained, she claimed to be Emma again, begging to be released. Dr. Harding has increased the frequency of the mirror sessions. The setback is disappointing but not unexpected. Catherine's spirit is strong, but Emma occasionally reasserts herself. July 20th, 1903. Installed locks on all bedroom doors. Emma must be confined at night for her own safety. She sleepwalks, conversing with someone invisible. When I observe her through the door grate, it appears she is speaking to two distinct entities, sometimes pleading with Catherine to leave her in peace, other times begging her dead sister to protect her from us. Dr. Harding suggests we accelerate the final phase. I must have fallen asleep while reading because I woke with a start at 3 a.m. The journal open on my chest. The room was freezing cold despite the summer heat outside, and in the silence I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A woman humming softly, the melody unfamiliar, yet somehow nostalgic. I sat up, fully awake now, and the humming stopped immediately. But as I reached for the lamp, I caught a whiff of lavender perfume. So strong it seemed someone had just sprayed it beside me. That was the first night it happened. Since then, the manifestations have grown stronger. I hear whispers in empty rooms. Objects move when I'm not looking. Twice I've woken to find the photograph placed on my pillow, though I'm certain I locked it in my briefcase before sleeping. Most disturbing of all, I've begun to dream of memories that aren't mine. A grand house I've never visited, a man's face leaning close. Thomas, I presume, and overwhelming fear as hands hold me down and force me to stare into a mirror where my reflection slowly morphs into another woman's face. I need to know what happened to Emma Wilson. The journal entries stop abruptly in early August 1903 with a cryptic final entry. August 7th, 1903. The merger is nearly complete. Emma rarely surfaces now. Catherine becomes stronger daily. Soon the transformation will be irreversible. Doctor. Harding warns that the vessel's original spirit must be fully extinguished for Catherine to remain permanently. I have made the necessary arrangements in the East Tower room. What must be done will be done tonight. Tomorrow I return to Ravenscroft Manor for the final week of my research. Lord Blackwood is away in Scotland, leaving me alone with the archives and whatever else dwells in that ancient house. The photograph watches me from my desk as I write this account. Sometimes, when the light hits it just right, I swear Emma's eyes follow me across the room, and in the darkest hours of night, I feel her presence, not Catherine's, but Emma's, a frightened soul trying desperately to tell her story. I fear I may be the only one who can give her voice, but as the boundaries between her experiences and mine continue to blur, I'm terrified of what completing this research might cost me. The drive back to Ravenscroft Manor the next morning was shrouded in an unseasonable fog that clung to the countryside like a burial shroud. Twice, I nearly missed turns on the winding country road. The landmarks I'd noted on my previous visits obscured by the grey haze. The manor itself seemed to emerge from the mist as if materializing from another dimension. First the Gothic spires of the East Wing, then the sprawling Victorian main house, and finally the crumbling West Wing that had been abandoned since the 1940s. I'd never noticed before how the structure resembled a massive bird of prey, its wings spread as if to ensnare anyone foolish enough to approach. Mrs. Winters, the elderly housekeeper, met me at the entrance. Lord Blackwood telephoned this morning, she informed me, her thin lips barely moving. He's extended his stay in Scotland through the weekend, but wishes you to continue your research as planned. I've prepared the Blue Room for your overnight accommodation. Overnight? I hadn't planned to stay at the manor itself. Indeed, his lordship insisted. The weather forecast suggests the fog will worsen, making evening travel hazardous. He was most concerned for your safety. Her tone suggested the decision was not up for debate. The Blue Room, as it turned out, was directly beneath the East Tower, the same tower mentioned in Thomas Blackwood's final journal entry. From my window, I could see the tower's circular room with its peculiar domed ceiling and stained glass skylight. The room had been sealed off, Mrs. Winters explained when I inquired, after a fire in 1920 damaged the interior. No one has entered it in decades, she said, setting down fresh towels. The door was bricked over during renovations. Was it always sealed? I asked, thinking of Thomas's cryptic reference to arrangements in the tower room. Mrs. Winters paused, her wrinkled hand hovering over the bedspread she'd been smoothing. It was accessible in Thomas Blackwood's time, yes. It served as his private study after Lady Catherine's passing. The servants called it the weeping room. The weeping room? Why? Those who cleaned it reported hearing crying, though no one was present. A draught, most likely. Old houses make peculiar sounds. Her matter-of-fact tone didn't match the unease in her eyes. Dinner is at 7D, should you wish to join me. Otherwise, I can have a tray sent up. After she left, I set up my research materials on the small writing desk by the window. The journal and photograph I'd taken from the archives lay before me. But there was still a significant gap in the story. What happened after that final entry on August 7th? What was the final phase that Thomas and Dr. Harding had planned for Emma? You won't believe what happened next. Watch until the end. I decided to return to the archives to search for additional materials. The manor was eerily silent as I made my way through its labyrinthine corridors. Even my footsteps seemed muffled by the thick carpet of silence that hung in the air. The archives were housed in what had once been the manor's library, a vast circular room with bookshelves stretching from floor to ceiling. A spiral staircase led to a gallery that ringed the upper level, providing access to the highest shelves. The room should have been bright, with its massive windows and glass ceiling, but the fog outside filtered the daylight into a grayish gloom that barely illuminated the dusty volumes. I began by examining the estate records from 1903, hoping to find some mention of Emma's fate. The ledgers documented everything from household expenses to staff wages. But Emma's name appeared only twice. Once in February when she was first brought to Ravenscroft, listed as E.I. Wilson, lady's maid, special arrangement, and again in August, where her name had been crossed out with a single line, the word departed, written beside it in Thomas's distinctive hand. But where had she gone? And why had Thomas been so vague about her departure in the estate records when his journal had been so detailed about everything else? The answer came from an unexpected source. Tucked between two accounting ledgers, I discovered a slim volume bound in faded red leather. It contained correspondence between Thomas and various associates, meticulously copied by a secretary. Most were business letters, but toward the end, I found an exchange with Dr. Harding from late August 1903, August 25th, 1903. Dr. Harding, the procedure was unsuccessful. Despite our preparations, Catherine's essence has withdrawn completely following the ritual. The vessel rejected the merger at the final stage, resulting in the current unfortunate situation. I have made arrangements as we discussed. The collection will be officially attributed to her declining mental state, with all documents backdated to appear as though the decision was made upon her initial assessment at Holloway. None will question it. The staff have been informed that Emma has been returned to the sanatorium due to a relapse. Your discretion in this matter is, as always, appreciated. The agreed-upon sum has been transferred to your account. Thomas Blackwood. The response, dated 3 days later, chilled me to the bone. August 28th, 1903. My dear Thomas, I have received confirmation from Wellsprings that the patient has been installed in the private wing as arranged. The examination revealed no physical trauma from the procedure, though the psychological state remains concerning. She responds to neither name now, neither Emma nor Catherine, and speaks only to ask about the baby. As we expected, the delusion of pregnancy has taken firm root. Rest assured, she will receive the finest care in absolute seclusion. The wing's location ensures she will never be seen by visitors, and the staff are well compensated for their silence. With proper management, she may live many years without incident. I have instructed the attendants to document any instances where she demonstrates knowledge or abilities belonging to Catherine, as this may yet prove our theory correct, albeit in an unexpected manner. I remain your loyal friend and colleague, Dr. James Harding, Director, Wellsprings Asylum, Wellsprings. I recognized the name immediately. It had been one of the most notorious private asylums in England, known for housing inconvenient relatives of the aristocracy. Unlike public institutions, which were subject to some oversight, private asylums like Wellsprings operated with virtually no regulation. Patients could be committed and held indefinitely on the word of a family member and a complicit doctor. The asylum had closed in the 1950s after a series of scandals, its records sealed by court order. But if Emma had been sent there in 1903, she might have spent decades imprisoned for no reason other than being an inconvenient loose end in Thomas Blackwood's occult experiment. Have you ever experienced something similar? Let us know in the comments. A soft sound behind me broke my concentration. The whisper of fabric brushing against wood. I turned quickly, but the archives were empty. Yet as I scanned the room, I noticed something that made my heart skip. The spiral staircase to the gallery, which I was certain had been positioned against the far wall when I entered, was now directly behind me. I blinked hard, disoriented. Had I become so engrossed in my reading that I'd lost track of my position in the room, or had the staircase somehow moved? Get a grip, Rebecca, I muttered to myself. Old houses played tricks on the eyes. But as I gathered my research materials, another detail caught my attention. On the gallery level, directly above where I'd been sitting, a single book lay open on the floor. A book that hadn't been there when I arrived. Even from below, I could see it was a photo album. Common sense told me to leave it alone, to return to the safety of the Blue Room with what I'd already discovered. But academic curiosity, or perhaps something else, something drawing me deeper into the mystery, compelled me to climb the spiral staircase. The gallery was thick with dust, clearly unused for years. My footprints marked my path clearly as I approached the open album. It was positioned too deliberately to be accidental, as if someone had placed it there specifically for me to find. The album contained photographs of Ravenscroft Manor and its inhabitants from the early 1900s. Many featured Thomas Blackwood, sometimes alone, sometimes with other men I assumed were colleagues or family members. Catherine appeared in several early images, a beautiful woman with a delicate face and sad eyes. The resemblance between her and Emma was indeed remarkable, though Catherine's features were softer, more refined. As I turned the pages, the photographs became increasingly strange. One showed Thomas standing in what appeared to be the East Tower room, surrounded by mirrors arranged in a circle. Another captured Emma seated at a piano, her eyes closed, her expression entranced, while Thomas stood behind her, his hands hovering near her temples. The final photograph in the album made my blood freeze. It showed Emma strapped to a chair in the center of the East Tower room. Mirrors surrounded her, positioned to create infinite reflections. Her eyes were wide with terror, her mouth open as if screaming. Thomas stood behind her, his expression triumphant, almost ecstatic. On the wall behind them hung a portrait of Catherine, positioned so that in the mirror directly in front of Emma, Catherine's face would have appeared superimposed over Emma's reflection. The photograph had been labeled in the same handwriting as the journal, the merging August 7th, 1903. I slammed the album shut, suddenly desperate to leave the archives. As I turned to descend the staircase, a woman's reflection flashed across the glass ceiling above. Not my own reflection, but that of a thin, wild-eyed woman in a maid's uniform with a grotesquely swollen belly. I gasped and looked up, but there was nothing there except fog pressing against the glass. When I looked back down, the photo album had vanished. In its place lay a small brass key with an ornate handle shaped like a raven. My rational mind scrambled for explanations. I was tired, suggestible from hours of reading about Emma's psychological manipulation. Perhaps I'd even fallen asleep briefly and dreamed the album. Though the key in my hand felt solid enough, I practically ran back to the blue room, the key clutched tightly in my fist. Once safely inside, I examined it more closely. The craftsmanship was clearly Victorian, the metal tarnished with age. A small tag attached to the ring bore a single word in faded ink: Tower. It couldn't be. The East Tower room had been sealed for a century, the door bricked over according to Mrs. Winters. Yet here was a key that seemed to promise access to that forbidden space. A key that had appeared to me under impossible circumstances. As evening approached, I found myself drawn to the window, staring up at the East Tower. Was it my imagination, or was there a faint light moving behind the stained glass skylight? As I watched, the light resolved into what appeared to be a candle flame, moving slowly around the circular room as if carried by an unseen hand. I should have been terrified, but instead, I felt an odd sense of calm certainty. Emma was trying to communicate with me. The mysterious appearances, the dreams, the key. She was leading me towards something, desperate to have her story told at last. A soft knock at my door startled me from my reverie. Mrs. Winters had brought dinner on a tray, her expression unreadable as she set it on the small table by the fireplace. "Is everything to your satisfaction, Dr. Collins?" she asked, her eyes darting briefly to the key I'd unconsciously placed on the desk. "Yes, thank you," I replied, moving to block her view of the key. "Mrs. Winters, do you happen to know if there's another entrance to the East Tower, perhaps one that wasn't sealed during the renovations?" The housekeeper's face remained impassive, but I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the silverware on the tray. "I wouldn't know about such things," she said stiffly. "And if I may offer some advice, Dr. Collins, some doors at Ravenscroft are better left unopened." After she left, I couldn't bring myself to eat. The fog outside had thickened into an impenetrable wall of grey, and the temperature in the room had dropped dramatically despite the fire Mrs. Winters had lit. As I sat huddled in an armchair, the brass key seemed to grow heavier in my pocket, its presence impossible to ignore. Just after midnight, I made my decision. If there was any chance of discovering what really happened to Emma Wilson, and why her story seemed so inexplicably entwined with my own, I needed to find my way into the East Tower room. With the key in hand and a small flashlight I'd packed for examining faded documents, I slipped out of the blue room into the darkened corridor beyond. What I found there would forever change my understanding of Ravenscroft Manor and the terrible secret hidden in that seemingly ordinary photograph from 1903. The corridors of Ravenscroft Manor seemed to shift and elongate as I made my way through the darkness, my small flashlight casting eerie shadows on the wood-paneled walls. Twice I found myself in passages I didn't recognize, though I'd spent weeks exploring the house during my research. It was as if the manor itself was rearranging its anatomy around me. I knew the East Tower was accessible through the third floor of the East Wing, but finding the exact location of its sealed entrance proved challenging. The architectural plans I'd studied in the archives showed a door at the end of the East Corridor, yet when I reached that spot, I found only an unbroken expanse of wallpaper adorned with faded lilies. Standing in confusion, I felt a distinct drop in temperature. My breath clouded in front of me, and the brass key in my palm grew ice cold. On instinct, I held it up to the wall and gasped as the wallpaper began to ripple like water, revealing the outline of a door that had been papered over. "This is impossible," I whispered, though by now I should have accepted that conventional logic had little place at Ravenscroft. The key slid into an invisible keyhole, as if guided by unseen hands. When I turned it, the sound of ancient tumblers clicking into place echoed through the silent corridor. The wall door swung inward, revealing a narrow spiral staircase winding upward into darkness. You won't believe what happened next. Watch until the end. The staircase was thick with cobwebs and dust. clear evidence that no one had passed this way in decades, despite the impossibly new-looking brass key that had opened it. As I climbed, I noticed small handprints in the dust on the banister, too small to belong to an adult. A child's hands, or perhaps the hands of someone who had been severely malnourished for years. At the top of the stairs, another door awaited me. This one made of heavy oak, reinforced with iron bands. It stood slightly ajar, a faint bluish light spilling through the crack. Swallowing my fear, I pushed it open. The East Tower room was exactly as it had appeared in the photograph from the album, circular, with a domed ceiling topped by a stained glass skylight. But where the photograph had shown mirrors arranged in a circle, the room now contained only their empty frames, the glass long since shattered. Fragments of mirror still littered the floor. Crunching beneath my feet as I entered, the source of the blue light was the moon, now visible through breaks in the fog, shining through the stained glass and casting colored patterns across the room. In the center stood the chair from the photograph, its leather restraints hanging open like hungry mouths. My flashlight beam revealed walls covered in strange symbols drawn in what looked like charcoal, spirals, stars, and complex geometric patterns I recognized from my studies of Victorian occultism. Between these symbols were words written in a frantic, jagged hand, repeated over and over, "I am Emma and not her vessel." A small writing desk stood against one wall, its surface bare except for a leather-bound volume similar to Thomas's journal. With trembling hands, I opened it, recognizing Emma's handwriting from notes I'd seen in the archives. April 14th, 1903. "I don't understand what's happening to me. Mr. Blackwood brought me here to recover, but something is wrong. The mirrors are everywhere. He makes me sit for hours, staring at my reflection while he whispers a woman's name behind me. Catherine. I'm starting to see her instead of myself." May 30th, 1903. "The baby is a lie. I discovered the padding they've sewn into my dresses. When I confronted Mr. Blackwood, he acted as if I were mad. 'Of course you're with child, my dear Catherine,' he said. 'But I'm not Catherine. I'm Emma Wilson. I must hold on to that truth.' June 22nd, 1903. "I hear her at night now, Catherine, whispering from the mirrors. She's trying to get in. Mr. Blackwood says that's good, that I should let her in, that my body is just a vessel prepared for her return. Sometimes I find myself doing things I don't remember, playing the piano, reciting poetry I've never learned. Time disappears. Yesterday I lost an entire day." The entries grew increasingly disjointed, the handwriting deteriorating. The final entry, dated August 6, 1903, the day before Thomas's merger ritual, sent ice through my veins. "They're planning something for tomorrow night. I overheard them, Thomas and the doctor. The final phase. Something about the mirrors and the alignment of stars through the skylight. I've tried to escape twice now, but the doors are locked, the windows barred. There's nowhere to run. I've scratched my real name into the floorboards beneath the bed. If I don't survive, if Catherine takes my place completely, at least some part of Emma Wilson will remain in this world. To whoever finds this, I was real. I existed. I'm not mad, and I'm terrified of what tomorrow will bring. Have you ever experienced something similar? Let us know in the comments." I closed the journal, my heart pounding. Poor Emma, used as a pawn in Thomas's desperate attempt to reclaim his dead wife, her very identity systematically erased. And yet, something had gone wrong with the ritual. The correspondence I'd found suggested that instead of Catherine fully taking over, Emma had been left in some in-between state, recognized as neither woman. But why was I being led to discover all this now, more than a century later? What did Emma, or whatever remained of her, want from me? As if in answer, the temperature in the room plummeted further. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving only the blue moonlight filtering through the skylight. The broken mirror fragments on the floor began to tremble, then rise into the air, spinning slowly around me in a glittering tornado of glass. I stood frozen in place, afraid to move lest the sharp fragments cut me. As they rotated faster, each piece began to reflect something different, not the tower room, but scenes I didn't recognize. A woman in a hospital bed, a nursery with an empty cradle, a graveyard under falling snow. The fragments suddenly aligned, forming a mosaic in mid-air, a full-length mirror reconstructed from hundreds of broken pieces. In its surface, I saw not my own reflection, but Emma's gaunt face staring back at me. Behind her stood Catherine, an exact duplicate except for her finer clothes and serene expression. "Who are you?" I whispered to the apparition. The lips of the reflection moved, but the voice seemed to come from behind me. Neither. Both. The vessel that holds two spirits. I spun around to find myself face to face with an elderly woman in a white nightgown, her ancient face deeply lined, but her eyes the same haunting amber as Emma's in the photograph. "You're still alive," I gasped, taking an involuntary step back. "And Emma!" The woman's face shifted subtly, her posture straightening, her expression becoming more refined. "Catherine," she corrected, then hunched again, eyes wild. "Emma!" She clutched her head as if in pain. "After so many years, the lines blur." "But how?" "The letters said you were sent to Wellsprings, and there I remained for 67 years. Her voice was surprisingly clear for someone who must have been well over 100 years old. "Until Jonathan found me." "Lord Blackwood, the current one?" She nodded. "Thomas's great-grandson. He discovered the truth while researching family history. Came to Wellsprings in 1970, shortly before it closed. Found an ancient woman in the private wing who should have died decades earlier, who didn't age normally." Her lips curved in a bitter smile. "A side effect of housing two souls in one body, perhaps, or of the ritual that was never quite completed. He brought you back here to Ravenscroft. My prison became my sanctuary. He established me in rooms below this tower, the only one of the Blackwoods to show kindness in a century." She moved toward the window, moonlight illuminating the deep hollows of her cheeks. "But now Jonathan is dying. Cancer, months to live at most. I need someone to know the truth before he's gone, and the next Lord Blackwood takes possession." "Richard," I murmured, remembering the name of Jonathan's nephew and heir. Emma, Catherine's face contorted with fear. "Richard believes, as Thomas did, that Catherine can be fully restored with the right vessel, that the ritual failed only because of some technical error." Her eyes locked with mine, desperate. "He's been searching for a suitable subject, someone with the right resonance." A chill ran through me as understanding dawned. "And that's why Jonathan gave me access to the archives. He wanted me to discover the truth. And why Richard has been watching you so carefully, testing your susceptibility." She gestured to the floating mirror fragments, which still hung suspended in the air. "You see them, don't you? The reflections that aren't reflections. The memories that aren't yours." I nodded slowly, remembering the dreams, the whispers, the inexplicable knowledge of places I'd never been. "It means you're compatible, a potential vessel." She stepped closer, her ancient hands grasping mine with surprising strength. "Richard returns tomorrow. He mustn't find you here. You must take the photograph and destroy it. The photograph of you and Thomas. It's not just a photograph. It's a tether, an anchor for the ritual. Thomas created it specifically for that purpose, imbuing it with Catherine's essence through methods best left unspoken. As long as it exists, it can be used to facilitate another attempt." The mirror fragments suddenly crashed to the floor, the supernatural energy holding them aloft dissipating as the old woman staggered. I rushed to support her as she sagged against me. "I don't have much strength left," she whispered. Maintaining this form, this coherence, grows harder each year. Soon Emma and Catherine will both fade, leaving only a husk behind. Her eyes, momentarily clear and focused, bore into mine. The photograph, the journal. You must take them away from here, destroy them both. I will, I promised. But what about you? Let me help you. We could leave together, get you proper care. A sad smile crossed her withered face. There is no proper care for my condition, Dr. Collins. I am an impossibility, 140 years old, with 2 fractured souls inhabiting a body that should have perished decades ago. She shook her head. My time approaches. I've held on only to prevent this from happening to another. As if on cue, a clock somewhere in the manor struck 3. The old woman's head snapped up, sudden alarm in her eyes. "He's here," she hissed. "Richard, I sense him, earlier than expected." She pushed me toward the door with surprising strength. "And go. Take the service stairs behind the pantry. They lead to a door on the east side of the grounds. My journal is hidden beneath the floorboards under the chair. Take it with the photograph and never return to this place." I hesitated, reluctant to leave her behind. Please," she begged, her voice shifting between refinement and desperation as Emma and Catherine seemed to take turns speaking. "Don't let our fate become yours." The sound of a car engine penetrated the tower room, a vehicle approaching up the long driveway. With a final glance at the ancient woman who had endured a century of fractured existence, I retrieved Emma's journal from its hiding place and fled down the spiral staircase. The manor was now fully awake, lights appearing in windows that had been dark moments before. I heard Mrs. Winters's voice calling for someone to help with luggage. Richard had indeed returned early. Keeping to the shadows, I made my way to the kitchen and found the service stairs the old woman had mentioned. They led down to a musty corridor that smelled of earth and age, clearly part of the original medieval foundation upon which the Victorian manor had been built. My flashlight, working again now that I was away from the supernatural energies of the tower, revealed rough stone walls lined with alcoves that might once have held wine or preserved foods. As I hurried through this underground passage, a flash of white in one of the alcoves caught my eye. I slowed, directing my light into the space, and immediately wished I hadn't. The alcove had been converted into a shrine of sorts. Dozens of small mirrors hung on the walls, surrounding a life-sized portrait of Catherine Blackwood. Below it sat a modern wheelchair, straps attached to its arms and legs, and a table holding what appeared to be medical equipment, heart monitors, IV stands, and other devices I couldn't identify. Most disturbing of all was a dress form in the center, draped with a white gown, identical to the one Emma Catherine had been wearing. Pinned to it was a note in elegant modern handwriting: "For the vessel, measurement adjustments may be needed." My blood ran cold as I realized I was looking at preparations for a new ritual, one intended for me. Richard hadn't just been monitoring my research, he'd been preparing for my transformation. The sound of footsteps above spurred me back into motion. I ran through the remainder of the passage until I reached a heavy wooden door, partially rotted with age. It opened with difficulty onto the foggy grounds of Ravenscroft, the manor now a looming shadow behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, hidden around a bend in the driveway. With shaking hands, I started the engine and sped away from Ravenscroft Manor, Emma's journal and the photograph safely in my bag. But as I navigated the winding country roads, still shrouded in unnatural fog, a terrifying thought occurred to me. What if I was already carrying something away from Ravenscroft besides physical objects? What if the dreams, the visions, the memories that weren't mine were signs that the process had already begun? I checked my rearview mirror and for a moment, just a moment, saw not my own face reflected back, but the gaunt features of Emma Wilson, her eyes wide with the same terror I now felt. I didn't go home. Home felt too exposed, too predictable. Instead, I drove through the night to a small coastal inn where I'd once stayed during a research trip, a place with no connection to me that Richard couldn't easily trace. I paid cash for a room under a false name, drawing on a paranoia that would have seemed absurd mere days ago, but now felt entirely justified. The room was simple but clean, with faded floral wallpaper and a bed that creaked with every movement. I pushed a chair against the door and covered the mirror with a towel before collapsing onto the mattress, Emma's journal and the photograph clutched to my chest like talismans. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me. Every time my eyes closed, I saw the floating mirror fragments, the ancient woman with two souls, the shrine prepared for the vessel. For me, you won't believe what happened next. Watch until the end. As dawn broke, I forced myself to examine the materials I'd rescued from Ravenscroft. Emma's journal contained entries I hadn't had time to read in the tower, descriptions of the ritual Thomas had performed, the incantations he'd recited while she sat surrounded by mirrors. She wrote of feeling Catherine's presence growing stronger with each session, of moments where she lost control of her own body, of waking to find herself wearing Catherine's clothes with no memory of changing. The final pages, written after the failed ritual, were the most disturbing. In fragmented, almost incoherent passages, Emma described the experience of sharing her consciousness with another entity. She's here, inside, with me, two minds in one skull. She wants control, fights me for it. Sometimes I sleep for days and wake to find weeks have passed. Sometimes we speak to each other inside, arguing over whose turn it is to exist. Sometimes we merge, and I cannot tell where Emma ends and Catherine begins. The entries abruptly stopped in mid-1904, suggesting Emma had been unable to continue documenting her fractured existence. Had Catherine gained dominance? Had the asylum treatments further damaged her already fragmented mind? Or had Thomas somehow retrieved the journal to prevent her from leaving evidence of his occult experiments? I turned my attention to the photograph itself, examining it more carefully than ever before. In normal light, it showed exactly what I'd seen initially, Thomas standing sternly beside the falsely pregnant Emma. But when I held it at an angle to the morning sunlight streaming through the window, additional details emerged. Faint lines had been etched into the photographic paper around Emma's figure, symbols matching those I'd seen on the walls of the East Tower room. And in the background, barely visible, was the reflection of a woman in a mirror that shouldn't have been in frame based on the angle of the shot, Catherine, watching from the glass. The photograph had been altered through some Victorian photographic trickery, creating a double exposure that merged Catherine's image with Emma's reflection. But beyond the technical manipulation, there was something else. An energy that seemed to emanate from the paper itself, a coldness that penetrated my fingers as I held it. I understood now why Catherine, had been so insistent that I destroy it. This wasn't merely a documentation of Thomas's scheme. It was an integral part of the ritual itself, a physical link between worlds that could be used to repeat the process. But how to destroy it? Simply burning or tearing it seemed insufficient given its supernatural properties. I needed to understand more about the ritual before attempting to dismantle its components. Emma's journal provided some clues. She wrote that Thomas had created the photograph on a glass plate negative treated with a solution containing Catherine's personal items, a lock of hair, ashes from burned letters, perfume from her favorite bottle. The physical photograph had then been developed during the ritual itself, the image emerging as Thomas chanted over the chemical bath. If the creation had been ritualistic, perhaps the destruction needed to be as well. I decided to search for more information before taking action, aware that doing it incorrectly might cause more harm than good. Using the inn's ancient computer in the lobby, I researched Victorian occult practices. particularly those involving mirrors and photography. Most sources were speculative or sensationalized, but I eventually found an academic paper on material anchors in Victorian spirit photography that referenced similar practices to what Thomas had attempted. According to the paper, such anchored objects could be neutralized through immersion in salt water during a waning moon, followed by burning at dawn. The timing was perfect. The moon was currently waning, and dawn was less than 24 hours away. As I was reading, my phone rang, displaying my department chairman's number. I hesitated before answering, wary of any contact from the outside world. "Rebecca, thank goodness, we've been trying to reach you," Professor Marsh said, his voice concerned. "A man named Richard Blackwood called the university looking for you. Said you'd taken valuable family artifacts from Ravenscroft Manor without permission." My heart raced. That's not true. I had Lord Blackwood's explicit permission to examine all materials in the archives. "Well, this Richard claims to have power of attorney for his uncle's estate now. Says the old man is no longer competent to make decisions." There was a pause. "Rebecca, he's threatening legal action against both you and the university if the items aren't returned immediately." "Jonathan Blackwood is dying of cancer," I said, recalling what Emma Catherine had told me. "Richard is manipulating the situation to gain control. Be that as it may, we can't afford a legal battle with a family like the Blackwoods. If you have their property, you need to return it." Richard mentioned a photograph and journal. I closed my eyes, weighing my options. "I'll handle it, Professor. There's more going on here than I can explain." "Rebecca," he began, but I ended the call, my decision made. "Have you ever experienced something similar? Let us know in the comments. I needed to complete the ritual before Richard tracked me down. I gathered salt from the inn's kitchen, filled a bucket with seawater from the nearby beach, and waited for nightfall. As the clock struck midnight, I submerged the photograph in the salt water, watching as the image seemed to ripple and distort beneath the surface. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw Emma's eyes in the photograph blink, but I told myself it was just a trick of the light on the water's surface. I left the photograph submerged overnight, placing Emma's journal beside the bucket. As I finally drifted to sleep, my dreams were blessedly empty. No visions, no memories that weren't my own, no whispers from beyond. Perhaps the salt water was already weakening whatever connection had been established. I awoke before dawn to prepare for the final step. Taking the now-soaked photograph from the water, I wrapped it in Emma's journal, binding them together with twine I'd purchased from a hardware store. The bundle would burn as one, destroying both the anchor and the record of its creation. The beach was deserted in the pre-dawn darkness. I dug a small pit in the sand, lined it with driftwood, and placed the bundle at its center. As the first rays of sunlight crested the horizon, I struck a match and set the bundle ablaze. The flame caught quickly, but instead of the normal orange-yellow of burning paper, it blazed with an unnatural blue-green light. A high-pitched whine emanated from the fire, like distant screaming. The smoke that rose formed distinct shapes before dissipating, faces that morphed from Emma to Catherine and back again. I backed away, watching in horrified fascination as the fire consumed the photograph and journal. When the last page had turned to ash, a final plume of smoke rose from the pit, twisting into the unmistakable shape of a woman who seemed to nod once in my direction before vanishing on the sea breeze. It was done. I collapsed onto the sand, exhausted but relieved. Whatever connection had been forming between me and the entities at Ravenscroft had been severed. I was free, or so I thought. 3 days later, back in my London flat, I received a small package. No return address, no note inside, just a single item that made my blood freeze, a brass key with a raven-shaped handle. I dropped it as if burned, backing away as it lay gleaming on my kitchen floor. It was impossible. The key had been in my pocket when I fled Ravenscroft. I'd left it at the inn, deliberately abandoning it when I checked out. My phone rang, displaying an unknown number. With trembling hands, I answered, "Dr. Collins." Richard Blackwood's voice was smooth, cultured, and terrifyingly calm. "I believe we have unfinished business." "The photograph is destroyed," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Whatever you're planning won't work now." He laughed softly. "The photograph, a single anchor among many. Useful, certainly, but not irreplaceable." A pause. "My great-great-grandfather was nothing if not thorough. He created multiple pathways for Catherine's return." "Emma is gone too," I countered. "Your vessel, both vessels, are lost to you." "Emma, yes. The poor woman finally achieved true death last night. A century of unnatural existence ended." His voice hardened. "But you're mistaken about the vessels, Dr. Collins. There was only ever one other suitable candidate. Why do you think my uncle invited you specifically to research at Ravenscroft?" A cold realization washed over me. The dreams, the visions, they weren't because I touched the photograph. They were already there. Indeed, Jonathan discovered your connection when researching your application. Your maternal great-grandmother was Catherine Blackwood's cousin, a distant relation, but sufficient for our purposes. The bloodline, however diluted, makes you compatible." Another pause. "The photograph merely accelerated a process that was already underway. Even destroying it can't sever a connection that exists in your very cells." I glanced at my reflection in the window, my face, but with something else behind the eyes, something watching. "What do you want?" I whispered. "Nothing complicated. Simply return to Ravenscroft to continue your research. Alone, of course." His tone was conversational, as if discussing a dinner invitation. "The East Tower room is prepared. One way or another, Catherine will live again." I hung up without responding, my mind racing. If Richard was telling the truth, destroying the photograph hadn't freed me at all. The connection remained, perhaps had always been there, dormant in my blood until awakened by proximity to Ravenscroft. As if confirming my fears, my reflection in the window smiled, a smile I recognized from Catherine's portrait, elegant and serene and utterly terrifying on my own face. I had hours, perhaps days, before Richard took more direct action. I needed to sever this connection permanently, to ensure Catherine's spirit could never use me as its vessel. But how? The answer came from Emma's own words, scribbled frantically in her journal. "I am Emma, not her vessel." Identity, the core of selfhood, had been Emma's final defense against complete possession. Even after a century of sharing her mind with Catherine, some fragment of Emma had persisted, refusing to be fully subsumed. I took out a notebook and began to write my own history, every memory, every experience that made me Rebecca Collins. My childhood in Bristol, my father's death when I was 12, my first archaeological dig at 16, the day I received my doctorate, every relationship, every triumph, every failure that shaped my identity. As I wrote, I felt something within me resist, a pressure behind my eyes, a voice that whispered I was wasting time, that I should return to Ravenscroft where I belonged. Catherine trying to assert control, but I continued writing through the night, anchoring myself to my own existence with each word. By dawn, I had filled the notebook. My hand cramped, my eyes burned, but my reflection in the mirror was my own again. For now, I knew this was only a temporary measure. As long as I carried Catherine's bloodline, I would remain vulnerable, and Richard Blackwood would not stop pursuing his family's century-old obsession. There was only one solution. I needed to make myself an impossible vessel. Se você quer ouvir mais sussurros da escuridão, siga o canal. A próxima história pode estar mais perto do que você imagina. 3 months later, a different Dr. Collins sits in a sun-drenched café in Buenos Aires, sipping coffee while reviewing notes for a book on Argentine folklore. My hair is now blonde instead of brown. My formerly green eyes now blue behind colored contacts. Cosmetic surgery has subtly altered the shape of my face. Nothing dramatic, just enough to sever the physical resemblance to Catherine Blackwood that had made me such an ideal vessel. Most importantly, the pendant around my neck contains a mixture of herbs and minerals that, according to several occult traditions, repel spiritual attachment. Whether they work through actual mystical properties or simply a psychological reinforcement of my own identity doesn't matter. They help me stay myself. Richard Blackwood still searches for Rebecca Collins. Private investigators have tracked her movements across Europe, carefully planted false trails I established before disappearing completely. Meanwhile, Dr. Eleanor Martinez, formerly of Oxford University, builds a new academic identity far from England and its ancient manners, with their even more ancient secrets. Sometimes I still dream of Emma and Catherine, 2 souls trapped in one decaying body for a century. I wonder if they've found peace now, or if Catherine's spirit still searches for a new vessel. I wonder if Richard has found another candidate with the right bloodline, the right resonance. And sometimes, in unguarded moments, I catch my reflection watching me with curious eyes that don't quite move when I do. A reminder that some connections, once established, are never truly broken. But those moments grow rarer with each passing day. I am Elena now. Elena, who has never heard of Ravenscroft Manor or the Blackwood family. Elena, who studies folklore as academic interest, not personal survival. Elena, who knows that the most terrifying truths often hide in plain sight, in a simple photograph of a stern young man and a haunted-looking maid with a false pregnancy. Their images frozen forever in a moment when 2 worlds overlapped, and the boundary between life and death, between self and other, became terrifyingly permeable. The key with the raven handle sits at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, weighed down with concrete. The notebooks containing Rebecca Collins's memories burned to ash. My old life, like Emma Wilson's, exists now only as a ghost. A story someone might tell, but can never touch. Editor's note: the manuscript above was discovered in a storage unit in London in 2023, 3 years after the disappearance of Dr. Rebecca Collins, a promising historian specializing in Victorian psychiatric practices. Despite extensive investigation, no trace of Dr. Collins has ever been found. Ravenscroft Manor was destroyed in a fire in 2021, with Lord Jonathan Blackwood and his nephew Richard among those who perished in the blaze. The authenticity of this document cannot be verified, and it is published here merely as a curiosity. The photograph described in the manuscript has never been located.